The rain pounded the cracked pavement, turning the narrow alley into a river of mud and shadows. Ethan Caldwell, billionaire CEO of Caldwell Tech, stood frozen, his tailored suit soaked through, clinging to his skin. His heart raced, not from the cold, but from the woman standing in front of him. Her eyes, wide with fear and fire, locked onto his. She clutched a rusty pipe in her trembling hands, ready to swing. Before we begin the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Please subscribe to my channel for more sweet videos like this. Let the story continue. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice shaking but fierce. "I don't care who you are, I'll knock you out." Ethan raised his hands, his gold watch glinting under the flickering streetlight. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice calm but urgent. I couldn't leave you here." The alley smelled of rotting trash and damp concrete. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed, growing louder. Ethan's polished shoes sank into the muck as he took a cautious step forward. The woman's grip on the pipe tightened, her knuckles white. She was small, barely reaching his shoulder, with tangled hair and a torn jacket. But there was something about her, something that made Ethan's chest tighten, something that made him forget the danger. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "You're some rich guy. You don't belong here." Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but a deafening crash interrupted him. A dumpster at the end of the alley toppled over, spilling garbage across the ground. Footsteps echoed, heavy and fast, coming closer. The woman's eyes darted toward the sound, panic flashing across her face. Ethan's pulse spiked. Whoever was coming wasn't friendly. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing her arm. She yanked free, glaring at him. "Don't touch me." But the footsteps were too close now, and the siren was screaming. Ethan's mind raced. He was a billionaire, used to boardrooms and private jets, not dark alleys and danger. Yet here he was, in the last place he'd ever expected, risking everything for a stranger. And as he looked into her eyes, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, something that scared him more than the footsteps closing in. What was happening to him? 3 days earlier, Ethan Caldwell sat in his penthouse office on the 81st floor of Caldwell Tower. The glass walls gave him a view of the entire city, sparkling under the morning sun. At 32, he was one of the youngest billionaires in the world. His company, Caldwell Tech, made smartphones, drones, and software that ran half the planet. He had everything: money, power, fame, but as he stared at the city below, he felt empty. "Mr. Caldwell?" His assistant, Lisa, poked her head into the office. "Your 10 a.m. meeting is ready." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Cancel it," he said. "Cancel all my meetings today." Lisa blinked, surprised. "But sir, the investors—" "I don't care," Ethan snapped, then softened his tone. "I need a break, Lisa. Just handle it." Lisa nodded and left, closing the door. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, staring at a framed photo on his desk. It showed him and his little brother Tommy laughing at the beach when they were kids. Tommy had been gone for 5 years now, lost to a car accident. Ethan hadn't felt whole since. He stood, grabbed his coat, and left the office. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay in that glass cage another second. His driver, Mike, raised an eyebrow when Ethan told him to take the day off. "You sure, boss?" Mike asked. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I'm walking." He wandered the city streets, blending into the crowd. People rushed past, unaware that the man in the expensive coat was worth billions. Ethan liked that. For once, he wasn't the CEO. He was just a guy. He walked for hours, past skyscrapers and coffee shops until the sun began to set. His feet ached, but he didn't stop. Something was pulling him forward, like a whisper he couldn't quite hear. That's when he saw the sign. It was small, faded, hanging above a narrow street. Hope's Kitchen. Ethan had never noticed it before, even though he'd driven through this part of the city 100 times. The street was rough, lined with crumbling buildings and graffiti. A group of men stood on the corner, eyeing him as he hesitated. Ethan's instinct screamed at him to turn back, but his curiosity won. He walked toward the sign. Hope's Kitchen was a tiny soup kitchen, tucked between a pawn shop and a boarded-up store. The windows were smudged, but warm light spilled out, inviting. Ethan pushed open the door, and a bell jingled. The room was crowded, filled with people in worn clothes, eating bowls of soup at long tables. The air smelled of bread and spices. Volunteers bustled behind a counter, serving food with smiles. Ethan stood in the doorway, feeling out of place. His suit probably cost more than the rent for this building. He was about to leave when a voice stopped him. "Hey, you gonna stand there all day or help out?" He turned and saw her. She was wiping her hands on a rag, her dark hair tied back in a messy ponytail. Her jacket was frayed, and her sneakers had holes, but her eyes sparkled with a mix of mischief and warmth. She couldn't have been older than 25. "Me?" Ethan asked, pointing to himself. "Yeah, you," she said, grinning. "We need hands. You look like you've got two. Name's Mia, by the way." "Ethan," he said, surprised by how easily his name slipped out. He never gave his first name. To strangers it was always Mr. Caldwell. But something about Mia made him feel normal. Mia tossed him an apron. "Put this on, Ethan. You're on dish duty." He caught the apron, stunned. "Dish duty?" "Yup," she said, already walking away. "Unless you're too fancy for it." Ethan stared at the apron, then at Mia's retreating form. He could leave. He should leave. He was a billionaire, not a dishwasher. But instead, he slipped the apron over his suit and followed her. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of something excitement, maybe. Or curiosity. He wasn't sure. For the next 2 days, Ethan came back to Hope's Kitchen. He told himself it was just a break from his life, a way to clear his head. But deep down, he knew it was Mia. She was different from anyone he'd ever met. She teased him when he fumbled with dishes, calling him fancy pants. She laughed easily, but her eyes held a quiet sadness, like she carried a heavy secret. Ethan wanted to know more about her, but she kept him at arm's length, always dodging his questions with a joke. The other volunteers liked Ethan, though. There was old Joe, who told stories about his days as a boxer, and Sarah, a shy teenager who blushed whenever Ethan spoke to her. They didn't know he was a billionaire, and Ethan didn't tell them. At Hope's Kitchen, he wasn't a CEO. He was just Ethan, the guy who was terrible at peeling potatoes. But not everyone was friendly. A man named Vince hung around the soup kitchen, always watching Mia. He was tall, with a shaved head and a scar across his cheek. Ethan didn't like the way Vince looked at her, like she was something he owned. One day, Ethan overheard Vince talking to Mia in the back room. "You owe me, Mia," Vince said, his voice low and threatening. "Don't forget that." "Leave me alone," Mia snapped, but her voice shook. Ethan stepped into the room, his fists clenched. "Everything okay?" he asked, staring at Vince. Vince smirked. "Mind your business, pretty boy." Mia shot Ethan a warning look. "It's fine, Ethan. Go back to the dishes." Ethan hesitated, but Mia's eyes begged him to leave. He backed off, but his stomach churned. Something was wrong, and he wasn't going to let it go. That night, Ethan stayed late at Hope's Kitchen, helping Mia clean up. The others had left, and the room was quiet, except for the hum of the old fridge. Mia scrubbed a pot, her movements quick and tense. "You don't have to stay," she said without looking at him. "I can handle it." "I want to," Ethan said. He paused, then added, "Who's Vince?" Mia's hands froze. "Nobody," she said too quickly. "Just a guy." "He didn't seem like anybody," Ethan pressed. "Is he trouble?" Mia turned to face him, her eyes flashing. "Why do you care, Ethan? You're just passing through, right? Some rich guy slumming it for fun?" Her words stung, but Ethan didn't back down. "I care because, I don't know, I just do." For a moment, Mia's guard dropped. Her expression softened, and she looked at him, really looked at him. Ethan's heart skipped. He wanted to say more, to tell her how she made him feel alive for the first time in years. But before he could, the door burst open. It was Vince, and he wasn't alone. Two other men stood behind him, their faces hard. "Time's up, Mia," Vince said, his voice cold. "You're coming with me." Mia's face paled, but she stood her ground. "I'm not going anywhere." Vince stepped closer, and Ethan moved in front of Mia without thinking. "Back off," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. Vince laughed. "You're in over your head, pretty boy." Ethan didn't see the punch coming. It hit him hard, sending him crashing into a table. Pain exploded in his jaw and the room spun. He heard Mia scream and then everything went black. When Ethan woke, he was alone in the soup kitchen. The lights were off and the tables were overturned. His jaw throbbed and his suit was torn. Panic surged through him. "Mia!" he called, but there was no answer. He stumbled to his feet, his head pounding. The back door was open, swinging in the wind. Ethan ran outside into the rain-soaked alley. The street was empty, but he heard voices in the distance, faint and angry. He followed them, his heart racing. The alley twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the city's underbelly. He passed boarded-up buildings and overflowing dumpsters, the rain blinding him. Finally, he saw her, Mia, standing in a dead-end alley, clutching a pipe. Vince and his men were closing in, their shadows looming. Ethan didn't think. He ran toward her, calling her name. Mia spun around, her eyes wide with shock. "Ethan," she gasped. "What are you doing here?" "I couldn't leave you," he said, his voice raw. That's when the dumpster crashed, and the footsteps grew louder. Ethan grabbed Mia's arm, but she pulled away, raising the pipe. The siren wailed closer, and Ethan realized they were trapped. Vince's men were almost on them, and the police were coming. Ethan's world, so carefully controlled, was falling apart. And yet, as he looked at Mia, he felt something new a pull, a connection, a spark that could only be one thing. But there was no time to think about it. The shadows moved closer, and Ethan knew they had to run. "Mia, trust me," he pleaded. Her eyes searched his, torn between fear and something else. Then, with a nod, she lowered the pipe. "Okay," she whispered. They turned to run, but a figure stepped out of the darkness, blocking their path. It was Vince, and he was holding a knife. Rain lashed down, blurring the alley into a haze of shadows and glints. Ethan's heart pounded as he stared at Vince, the knife in his hand catching the dim streetlight. Its blade was jagged, wickedly sharp, and pointed straight at Mia. She stood beside Ethan, her breath ragged, the rusty pipe still in her grip. The siren wailed closer, but it felt miles away. In that moment, it was just the three of them, Ethan, Mia, and the man who wanted to tear everything apart. "Last chance, Mia," Vince growled, his scar twisting as he sneered. "Come with me, or this rich boy gets cut." Ethan's stomach churned, but he stepped forward, shielding Mia. "You're not touching her," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. He was no fighter. His world was contracts and boardrooms, not knives and alleys. But something about Mia made him fearless, or maybe just reckless. Vince laughed, a harsh, guttural sound. "Big hero, huh? You don't even know what you're in for." He took a step closer, the knife glinting. Behind him, the other two men loomed, their faces hidden in the rain. Ethan could feel Mia trembling beside him, but her grip on the pipe didn't waver. "Vince, stop," Mia shouted, her voice cutting through the storm. "This has nothing to do with him." "Oh, it does now," Vince said, his eyes flicking to Ethan. "He's in my way." Ethan's mind raced. He had money. Power could he bribe Vince? But one look at the man's cold eyes told him money wouldn't work. This was personal. He glanced at Mia, her face pale but fierce, and realized she was the key to this. Whatever Vince wanted, it was tied to her. "Mia, what does he want?" Ethan whispered, keeping his eyes on Vince. She hesitated, then muttered, "It's complicated. I owe him from a long time ago." "Enough chit-chat," Vince snapped, lunging forward. Ethan reacted on instinct, shoving Mia behind him and dodging to the side. The knife sliced through the air, missing him by inches. He stumbled, his polished shoes slipping in the mud. Vince swung again, and Ethan threw up his arm, catching the blow on his forearm. Pain seared through him as the blade grazed his skin, tearing his sleeve. Blood mixed with the rain, warm and sticky. "Ethan!" Mia screamed, swinging the pipe at Vince. It connected with his shoulder, making him stagger, but he didn't drop the knife. The other two men charged forward, one grabbing for Mia, the other aiming for Ethan. Ethan's world narrowed to survival. He tackled the man coming for him, both of them crashing into the wet pavement. Fists flew Ethan's clumsy but desperate, the man's hard and practiced. A punch landed on Ethan's ribs, knocking the air out of him, but he kept fighting, driven by something deeper than fear. He had to protect Mia. Mia was holding her own, swinging the pipe like a bat, but she was outnumbered. The second man grabbed her arm, twisting it until she cried out. The pipe clattered to the ground. Ethan roared, adrenaline surging, and shoved his attacker away. He scrambled to his feet, diving toward Mia's assailant and tackling him into a pile of garbage bags. The alley erupted in chaos grunts, shouts, the splash of puddles. The siren was deafening now, red and blue lights flashing at the alley's entrance. Vince cursed, his eyes darting toward the lights. "This ain't over, Mia!" He spat, then turned and ran, his men following. They vanished into the shadows just as police boots splashed into the alley. Ethan collapsed against the wall, gasping, his arm bleeding. Mia knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she touched his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, though pain throbbed through him. "You?" She didn't answer, her eyes scanning the alley, still wide with fear. The police were closing in, shouting for them to stay where they were. Ethan's mind spun. He was a billionaire, used to controlling every situation, but this was out of his hands. And yet, as he looked at Mia, her face smudged with dirt and rain, he felt that same pull from before, stronger now, undeniable. It was crazy, impossible, but he was falling for her, right here in this filthy alley. "Freeze!" a cop shouted, flashlight blinding them. Ethan raised his hands, wincing as his arm burned. Mia did the same, her expression unreadable. The cops surrounded them, barking questions, but Ethan barely heard. His focus was on Mia, on the way her eyes flickered with secrets she hadn't told him. What had she done to make Vince so angry? And why did Ethan care so much? 2 days earlier, Ethan's second day at Hope's kitchen had been quieter, but the tension was already building. He'd spent the morning scrubbing pots, his hands red from hot water. Mia worked beside him, chopping vegetables with quick, practiced movements. Now and then, their eyes met, and she'd flash a teasing grin. "You're getting better, Fancy Pants," she said, tossing a carrot peel at him. "Maybe you're not useless." Ethan caught the peel, laughing. High praise. Her smile faded slightly, and she turned back to her cutting board. Ethan wanted to ask her about herself, where she came from, why she worked at the soup kitchen, but she always changed the subject. Instead, he told her about his brother Tommy, surprising himself with how easily the words came. "He was the fun one," Ethan said, scrubbing a pot. "Always making people laugh. After he died, I don't know. I threw myself into work. Forgot how to live, I guess." Mia paused, her knife hovering over a potato. "I get that," she said softly. "Losing someone, it changes you." He waited, hoping she'd say more, but she didn't. The moment passed, and she was back to joking, calling him out for missing a spot on the pot. But Ethan felt a connection, fragile but real. He wanted to know her, to understand the sadness in her eyes. That's when Vince showed up. Ethan hadn't noticed him at first, too focused on Mia. But when he looked up, Vince was leaning against the counter, watching them. His presence changed the room, like a storm cloud rolling in. The other volunteers grew quiet, and Mia's shoulders tensed. "Need something, Vince?" she asked, her tone sharp. Just checking on you, Vince said, his smile cold. Making sure you're not forgetting your promises. Mia's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Vince lingered a moment longer, then left, slamming the door behind him. Ethan wanted to ask about it, but Sarah, the shy volunteer, interrupted, asking for help with a tray of bread. The day moved on, but Ethan couldn't shake the unease. By the end of the day, he and Mia were alone again, wiping down tables. The soup kitchen was peaceful, the only sound, the soft creak of the floorboards. Ethan took a chance. "Mia, who is Vince to you?" he asked. She froze, then kept wiping the table, harder than necessary. "Nobody important," she said. "Just someone I used to know." "He doesn't act like it," Ethan said gently. "If you're in trouble, you can tell me." She laughed, but it was bitter. "What, you gonna swoop in and save me, Fancy Pants? You don't even know me." "I want to," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Mia stopped wiping, her eyes meeting his. For a second, he thought she might open up, but then she shook her head. "You're sweet, Ethan, but you're out of your league here." She walked away, leaving him with a rag in his hand and a dozen questions in his head. He didn't know it then, but that conversation was the first thread unraveling a much bigger story, one that would lead him to that alley, to blood and rain, and a feeling he couldn't name. Back in the present, the police station was a blur of fluorescent lights and noise. Ethan sat on a hard bench, his arm bandaged, his suit ruined. Mia was across the room, talking to an officer, her arms crossed tightly. The cops had separated them after the alley, asking endless questions. Ethan told them what he could. He'd been at the soup kitchen Vince attacked, and they ran. But he left out the part about his feelings for Mia. That was too new, too raw. The officer questioning him, a gruff man named Detective Harris, leaned forward. "You're Ethan Caldwell, right? The tech guy?" Ethan nodded, bracing himself. His name always changed things. "So what's a billionaire doing in a place like that?" Harris asked, his eyes narrow. "You slumming it? Or is there more to this?" "I was helping out," Ethan said. "That's all." Harris didn't look convinced. "And the girl? Mia Torres. You know her well?" "Not really," Ethan admitted, though it felt like a lie. "She works at the soup kitchen. I was just trying to help her." Harris scribbled something in his notebook. "Word of advice, Mr. Caldwell. People like Mia, they've got baggage. You might want to steer clear." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He glanced at Mia, who was staring at the floor, her expression closed off. What baggage? What was she hiding? After what felt like hours, the cops let them go, with a warning to stay out of trouble. Ethan and Mia stepped outside into the dawn, and the rain finally stopped. The city was waking up, delivery trucks rumbling past, streetlights flickering off. Ethan's arm ached, and exhaustion weighed him down, but he couldn't leave Mia. Not now. "You didn't have to do that," Mia said, her voice quiet. "Back there, with Vince, you could have gotten killed." "I know," Ethan said, "but I couldn't let him hurt you." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, he thought she might say something real, something that would explain everything. But then she turned away. "You should go home, Ethan. This isn't your fight." He wanted to argue, to tell her he was in too deep to walk away. But before he could, a black car screeched to a stop in front of them. The window rolled down, revealing Vince's scarred face. "Get in, Mia," he said, his voice low. "Or I come back for both of you." Mia's face went white. Ethan stepped forward, ready to fight again, but Mia grabbed his arm. "Don't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please." She climbed into the car, and it sped off, leaving Ethan alone on the sidewalk, his heart pounding with fear and something deeper, something that felt like love, but was tangled with danger and secrets he didn't understand. What had he just lost? And what was he willing to risk to get her back? The black car's taillights vanished into the early morning haze, leaving Ethan alone on the wet sidewalk. His heart hammered, a mix of fear, anger, and something he couldn't name. Mia was gone, taken by Vince, and Ethan had let it happen. His bandaged arm throbbed, his suit was a muddy wreck, and the city around him felt foreign, like he'd stepped into someone else's life. But one thing was clear. He wasn't walking away. Not from Mia, not from this. He pulled out his phone. The screen cracked from the fight in the alley. His first instinct was to call his security team, or maybe his lawyer. He was Ethan Caldwell. Billionaire CEO problems like this were handled with money and influence. But as he stared at the screen, he hesitated. This wasn't a boardroom deal. This was personal. And something told him Mia wouldn't want his money fixing her problems. Instead, he dialed Lisa, his assistant. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with worry. "Mr. Caldwell? Where are you? It's 6 a.m. You didn't come back to the office yesterday, and—" "I'm fine," Ethan cut in, though his voice was hoarse. "I need you to do something for me, Lisa. No questions, okay?" A pause then. "Okay. What do you need?" "Find out everything you can about a guy named Vince Tall, shaved head, scar on his cheek, and a woman named Mia Torres. They're connected to Hope's Kitchen, the soup kitchen on 14th Street. I need addresses, records, anything you can dig up. Fast." Lisa didn't hesitate. "I'm on it. But sir, are you sure you're okay? You sound—" "I'm fine," he said again, sharper this time. "Just get me the info. I'll call you later." He hung up, his breath fogging in the chilly air. The police station loomed behind him, its lights harsh against the dawn. Ethan started walking, his mind racing. He didn't know where Vince had taken Mia, but he wasn't going to sit around waiting for answers. Hope's Kitchen was the only lead he had. Maybe someone there, old Joe, Sarah, anyone knew something about Vince or Mia's past. As he walked, the city woke up around him. Street vendors set up carts, taxis honked, and early commuters hurried past. Ethan barely noticed. His thoughts were on Mia, her fierce eyes, her quick smile, the way she'd looked at him in the alley, like she wanted to trust him but couldn't. What was she hiding? And why did he care so much? He'd only known her for 3 days, but it felt like longer, like she'd cracked open a part of him he'd buried since Tommy died. The memory of his brother hit him hard. Tommy would have loved this Ethan, the uptight CEO, chasing a girl through alleys, getting into fistfights. "Live a little, bro," Tommy used to say, ruffling Ethan's hair. Well, Ethan was living now, and it was messy, dangerous, and terrifying, but it was also the most alive he'd felt in years. Hope's Kitchen was quiet when Ethan arrived, the faded signs swaying in the breeze. The door was locked, but a light glowed inside. He knocked, his knuckles stinging from the cold. After a moment, old Joe opened the door, his weathered face creasing with surprise. "Ethan, what the heck happened to you?" Joe asked, eyeing Ethan's torn suit and bandaged arm. "You look like you got run over by a truck." "Something like that," Ethan said, stepping inside. The familiar smell of bread and coffee hit him, grounding him for a moment. "Joe, I need your help. It's about Mia." Joe's expression darkened. He closed the door and locked it, glancing out the window as if checking for trouble. "Mia, huh? Figured you'd ask about her sooner or later. What's going on?" Ethan hesitated. How much could he trust Joe? But the old man's eyes were kind, and Ethan had of options. He told him everything. The fight at the soup kitchen, the alley, Vince's knife, the black car. Joe listened, his face growing grimmer with every word. When Ethan finished, Joe sighed, rubbing his gray beard. "Mia's a good kid, but she's got a past. Most folks here do. I don't know the whole story, but I know Vince. He's bad news. Runs with a rough crowd, drugs, gambling, that kind of thing. Mia used to be tangled up with him years ago. Thought she'd gotten free, but I guess not." Ethan's chest tightened. "Tangled up how?" Joe shrugged. "She never said much, just hints. Said she made mistakes, owed people things. Vince always comes around, sniffing for her. I told her to go to the cops, but she wouldn't. Said it'd make things worse." Ethan paced, his shoes squeaking on the worn floor. I need to find her, Joe. Vince took her. She's in trouble. Joe studied him, his eyes sharp. You sure about this, son? You're in deep, and you don't even know what you're chasing. Mia's not just some damsel. She's got secrets, and they're heavy. I don't care, Ethan said, his voice fierce. I'm not leaving her with that creep. Joe nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. All right. I don't know where Vince is, but I know someone who might. A guy named Rico hangs out at a dive bar called the Rusty Anchor, a couple of blocks from here. He's a lowlife, but he knows Vince's crew. Be careful, though. That place ain't friendly to outsiders. Ethan thanked him and turned to leave, but Joe grabbed his arm. One more thing. Whatever Mia's done, she's worth saving. But don't expect her to thank you. She's stubborn as a mule. Ethan managed a small smile. I noticed. The Rusty Anchor was a hole-in-the-wall bar, its neon sign flickering above a dented door. Ethan pushed inside, the stench of stale beer and smoke hitting him like a wave. The place was dim, filled with rough-looking men and a few tired women, all nursing drinks. Heads turned as Ethan walked in, his torn suit and city boy vibe screaming, outsider. He ignored the stares and scanned the room for Rico. Joe had described him short, wiry, with a gold tooth and a snake tattoo on his neck. Ethan spotted him at a corner table, laughing with two other guys. Taking a deep breath, Ethan approached, his heart pounding. He wasn't used to places like this, but he wasn't backing down. Rico, Ethan asked, stopping at the table. Rico looked up, his gold tooth glinting as he grinned. Who's asking? I'm looking for Vince, Ethan said, keeping his voice steady. I hear you know him. Rico's grin faded. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. What's it to you, fancy boy? The other two guys snickered, but Ethan didn't flinch. I need to find him. It's about Mia Torres. Rico's eyes narrowed, and the air at the table shifted, like Ethan had said something dangerous. Mia, huh? You her new boyfriend or something? No, Ethan said, though the word felt wrong. I'm just trying to help her. Rico studied him, then leaned forward, his voice low. Vince doesn't like people sniffing around his business. And Mia? She's his business. You want to find him, you're gonna need more than a pretty face and a fat wallet. Ethan's jaw clenched. Name your price. Rico laughed, but it was cold. Ain't about money, man. It's about survival. Vince is at a warehouse on Pier 17, but if you go there, you're walking into a lion's den. My advice? Forget Mia. She's not worth it. Ethan ignored the warning. Pier 17. Thanks. He turned to leave, but Rico's voice stopped him. Hey, fancy boy. When Vince cuts you up, don't say I didn't warn you. Ethan didn't look back. He stepped out into the street, the morning sun harsh after the bar's gloom. Pier 17 was across town, a rundown industrial area by the docks. He could call the police, but Joe's words echoed in his head. Mia didn't trust cops. Whatever she was running from, it was deeper than Ethan understood. He had to do this himself. His phone buzzed. It was Lisa, texting him a file. Found some stuff on Mia Torres and Vince. Be careful. Ethan opened the file, his stomach twisting as he read. Mia had a recorpity theft. A few years back, tied to a gang Vince ran. She'd gotten out, gone clean, but Vince was still listed as a person of interest in several open cases. The file didn't say why Mia owed him, but it was enough to confirm Joe's story. She was in deep, and Vince wasn't letting go. Ethan hailed a cab, his mind made up. He was going to Pier 17, for Mia. For whatever this feeling was that wouldn't let him walk away. Pier 17 smelled of salt and rust, the docks lined with crumbling warehouses and abandoned crates. Ethan paid the cab driver and stepped out, his heart racing. The warehouse Joe mentioned was easy to spot boarded windows, a rusted gate, and two men standing guard outside. They didn't look like Vince's crew from the alley, but they were trouble all the same. Ethan crouched behind a stack of pallets, watching. He wasn't a spy, but he'd seen enough movies to know he couldn't just walk in. His arm ached, and his ribs were bruised from the fight, but he pushed the pain down. Mia was in there, somewhere. He could feel it. One of the guards lit a cigarette, turning away. Ethan saw his chance. He slipped along the warehouse's side, finding a loose board in the wall. It creaked as he pried it open, but the guards didn't hear over the crash of waves. He squeezed through, stepping into a dark, cavernous space that smelled of oil and mold. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of crates and machinery. Dim lights hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows. Ethan moved quietly, his shoes silent on the concrete. Voices echoed from deeper inside, low and angry. He followed them, his pulse pounding in his ears. He reached a clearing and froze. Mia was there, tied to a chair, her face bruised but defiant. Vince stood over her, his knife in hand, barking orders at 3 other men. Ethan's blood boiled, but he forced himself to stay calm. He was outnumbered, outmatched. He needed a plan. "Mia, you're making this harder than it needs to be," Vince said, twirling the knife. "Just tell me where it is, and we're done." "I don't have it," Mia snapped, her voice hoarse. "I told you, I got rid of it." Vince slapped her hard, and Ethan nearly lunged out of hiding. Only the sight of the other men, their hands on guns, stopped him. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. Whatever it was the key to this mess. And Mia was paying the price. Ethan scanned the room, spotting a stack of crates nearby. If he could knock them over, it might cause enough chaos to grab Mia and run. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. He crept closer, his heart in his throat, when a hand clamped over his mouth. He spun, ready to fight, but it was old Joe, his face grim. "Quiet, kid," Joe whispered. "You're gonna get yourself killed." "What are you doing here?" Ethan hissed, pulling free. "Followed you," Joe said. "Knew you'd do something stupid. Now listen, we got one shot to get Mia out. You distract him, I'll cut her loose." Ethan nodded, adrenaline surging. He didn't know how Joe got there, but he wasn't arguing. He picked up a metal pipe from the floor, its weight reassuring in his hand. With a deep breath, he stepped out of the shadows and threw the pipe at the crates. The crash was deafening, crates tumbling in a cloud of dust. Vince and his men spun, shouting, and Ethan ran forward, yelling to draw their attention. "Over here, Vince!" Vince's eyes locked onto him, fury twisting his face. "You again?" he roared, charging. Ethan dodged, sprinting toward another stack of crates. Gunshots rang out, bullets pinging off metal. He dove behind cover, his heart pounding. Across the room, he saw Joe slip toward Mia, a knife flashing as he cut her ropes. She was free, but Vince was closing in, his men spreading out. Ethan grabbed another pipe and threw it, hitting one of the men in the leg. The man went down, cursing, but Vince was faster. He tackled Ethan, slamming him into the concrete. Pain exploded in Ethan's back, and Vince's knife pressed against his throat. "Big mistake, rich boy," Vince snarled. Ethan struggled, but Vince was too strong. The blade bit into his skin, a thin line of blood trickling down. He thought of Mia, of her smile, of the life he hadn't lived until now. He couldn't let it end here. Then Mia's voice cut through the chaos. "Vince, stop!" Ethan looked up, gasping. Mia stood a few feet away, holding a gunon of Vince's men's, snatched in the chaos. Her hands shook, but her eyes were steady, locked on Vince. "Let him go," she said, her voice low. "Or I shoot." Vince froze, his knife still at Ethan's throat. The warehouse went silent, the only sound, the distant crash of waves. Ethan's heart pounded, his eyes on Mia. She was terrified, but she was fighting for him. What was she going to do? And what secret was worth all this blood? The warehouse was a frozen tableau, the air thick with tension. Mia stood, her hands trembling as she gripped the gun, its barrel pointed at Vince. Her bruised face was set with determination, but her eyes flickered with fear. Ethan lay pinned beneath Vince, the knife's cold edge biting into his throat. a thin trickle of blood warming his skin. Old Joe crouched in the shadows, his knife still in hand, watching for an opening. The other men, recovering from the crate collapse, circled like wolves, their guns half raised but uncertain with Mia's weapon in play. The distant crash of waves outside was the only sound, underscoring the standoff. Vince's scarred face twisted into a sneer, but his eyes darted, calculating. "You won't shoot, Mia," he said, his voice low and mocking. "You don't have the guts." "Try me," Mia snapped, her voice steady despite the shake in her hands. "Let him go, Vince. Now." Ethan's heart pounded, his breath shallow under the knife's pressure. He wanted to tell Mia to run, to save herself, but he couldn't speak without risking the blade. Her eyes met his for a split second, and in them, he saw something raw fear, yes, but also a fierce protectiveness for him. It made his chest ache even now, with death so close. Vince laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the warehouse walls. "You're gonna throw everything away for this guy? Some rich idiot who doesn't even know you?" He pressed the knife harder, and Ethan winced, feeling the sting deepen. "Tell me where it is, Mia. Last chance." "I told you," Mia said, her voice breaking but defiant. "I don't have it. I never did." "Liar!" Vince roared, his free hand grabbing Ethan's collar, yanking him up slightly. "You think you can play me, after everything?" Ethan's mind raced. Whatever Vince was after, was the key to this nightmare. Mia had said she got rid of it, but Vince didn't believe her. Ethan needed to buy time, to give Joe a chance to act, or Mia a chance to escape. He forced his voice out, rough but clear. "Vince, whatever you want, I can get it. Money, resources, name it." Vince's eyes flicked to him, cold and amused. "You think this is about money? You're dumber than you look?" He leaned closer, his breath sour. "This is about loyalty. Mia owes me, and she's gonna pay." Before Ethan could respond, a shout came from the shadows. "Drop the knife!" It was Joe, stepping into the dim light, his knife raised. The distraction was enough. Vince's grip loosened for a fraction of a second. Ethan seized the moment, twisting hard and slamming his elbow into Vince's ribs. The knife grazed his neck as it fell, clattering to the concrete. Ethan scrambled to his feet, pain screaming through his body. Vince lunged for the knife, but Mia fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the gunshot deafening. Dust rained down, and Vince froze, his men hesitating. "Don't move," Mia shouted, her voice raw with desperation. Joe moved fast, grabbing Mia's arm. "Come on, kid, we gotta go!" But Vince wasn't done. He dove for the knife, rolling to his feet with a snarl. "You're dead, all of you!" He charged at Mia, and Ethan acted without thinking, tackling Vince into a stack of crates. The impact sent crates crashing, wood splintering around them. Ethan's ribs burned, his vision blurring, but he held Vince down, fists swinging. Mia screamed his name, and Joe pulled her toward the exit. "Ethan, move!" Joe yelled. Ethan landed one last punch, dazing Vince, then stumbled back, his body screaming in protest. The other men were closing in, guns raised, but the sound of siren's this time, not distant cut through the chaos. Red and blue lights flashed through the warehouse's broken windows, and the men hesitated, panic flickering in their eyes. "Cops!" one of them shouted, and they scattered, vanishing into the shadows. Vince, bloodied but still conscious, glared at Ethan. "This ain't over," he spat, then bolted, disappearing through a side door. Ethan staggered toward Mia and Joe, his legs barely holding him up. Mia broke free from Joe's grip, running to him, her hands grabbing his face. "You idiot," she whispered, tears mixing with the dirt on her cheeks. "Why didn't you run?" Ethan managed a weak smile, his neck stinging. "Couldn't leave you." For a moment, the world narrowed to just Themer hands on his face, her eyes searching his, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Then Joe's voice broke the spell. "Cops are here. We gotta move now." They ran, slipping out the same loose board Ethan had used to enter. The docks were alive with police cars, their lights cutting through the morning fog. Ethan, Mia, and Joe ducked behind a stack of crates, catching their breath. Ethan's phone buzzed Lisa again, probably with more info, but he ignored it. His focus was on Mia, who was shaking, the gun still in her hand. "Mia," he said softly, touching her arm. "What's going on? What does Vince want?" She looked at him, her eyes haunted. For a long moment, she didn't speak, and Ethan thought she'd shut him out again. But then she took a shaky breath and started talking. "It's a flash drive," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "from years ago when I was different. I ran with Vince's crew, did stupid things, stealing mostly. But one job went big. We hacked a company, got data worth millions. I was supposed to hold the drive, keep it safe, but I couldn't do it anymore. I wanted out, so I hid it and ran." Ethan listened, his heart sinking. "And Vince thinks you still have it." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "He's been after me ever since. I thought I'd lost him, started over at Hope's Kitchen, but he found me. He thinks I'm gonna give him the drive, or he'll kill me." Joe, crouched nearby, shook his head. "You should have told me, kid. I could have helped." "I didn't want anyone else hurt," Mia said, her voice breaking. "And now," she looked at Ethan, guilt flooding her face. "Now you're in this and it's my fault." Ethan wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault that he'd chosen this, but the sirens were getting closer, and they couldn't stay. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice firm. "But we need to get somewhere safe." Joe nodded. "My place. It's a dive, but it's off the grid. Come on." They moved quickly, sticking to alleys and side streets, avoiding the police. Ethan's body ached, his neck and arm burning, but he kept pace, driven by the need to protect Mia. As they ran, he realized something: he wasn't just falling for her. He loved her. It was crazy, reckless, but undeniable. In the last place he'd ever expected, a soup kitchen, an alley, a warehouse, he'd found something real. Joe's apartment was a cramped, cluttered space above a laundromat, smelling of old coffee and cigarette smoke. The walls were covered in faded boxing posters, and a single window overlooked a fire escape. Ethan collapsed onto a sagging couch, wincing as his injuries protested. Mia sat across from him, the gun now on the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Joe locked the door and pulled the curtains, his face grim. "We're safe for now," Joe said. "But Vince ain't done, and the cops will be looking for you two after that mess." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. He pulled out his phone, finally checking Lisa's message. The file had more details: Mia's old arrest records, Vince's ties to a bigger crime syndicate, even a mention of the flash drive, though the cops never recovered it. Ethan's stomach twisted. This was bigger than he'd thought. "Mia," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "Where's the flash drive?" She looked at him, her eyes wary. "I told you, I got rid of it." "Did you?" he pressed, not accusing, just searching. "Because if it's still out there, Vince won't stop, and neither will the people he works for." Mia's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Ethan thought she'd shut down. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's hidden," she admitted. "At Hope's Kitchen, in the back room. There's a loose floorboard under the sink. I didn't want it, but I couldn't destroy it. It's leverage, in case Vince ever came back." Ethan exchanged a look with Joe, who nodded slightly. "We need that drive," Joe said. "If Vince gets it, he's got power. If we get it, we can use it to end this. Or it'll make things worse," Mia said, her voice small. "That data, it's not just money. It's names, secrets. People would kill for it." Ethan's mind spun. He was a billionaire, used to high-stakes deals, but this was a different kind of danger. Still, he couldn't back out. Not with Mia's life on the line. "Then we get it first," he said, "and we figure out what to do next." Mia looked at him, her eyes softening. "Why are you doing this, Ethan? You could walk away, go back to your fancy life. Why risk everything?" He hesitated, the truth heavy on his tongue. "Because you're worth it," he said simply. "And because I think I'm falling for you." The room went quiet. Joe coughed, looking away, but Mia stared at Ethan, her expression unreadable. For a moment, he thought he'd said too much, scared her off. But then she reached out, her hand brushing his. "You're crazy," she whispered, but there was a warmth in her voice, a crack in her walls. Before Ethan could respond, a loud bang came from the door. Joe grabbed his knife, motioning for silence. Ethan's heart leaped as he stood, pulling Mia behind him. The bang came again, followed by a voice low, familiar and chilling. "Mia, I know you're in there," Vince said. "Open the door, or I burn this place down." Ethan's blood ran cold. Vince had found them. The apartment was a trap now, with no way out but through him. Ethan looked at Mia, her face pale but resolute, and knew they were in this together. But as the door rattled under Vince's pounding, a new fear gripped him. What if love wasn't enough to save them? The door shook under Vince's pounding, each thud echoing like a drum in the cramped apartment. Ethan's heart raced, his bruised body tense as he stood in front of Mia, shielding her. Old Joe gripped his knife, his weathered face set with grim determination, while Mia clutched Ethan's arm, her breath quick and shallow. The air smelled of dust and fear, the boxing posters on the walls seeming to watch the scene unfold. Outside, the hum of the laundromat below mixed with the distant wail of a siren too far to help. "Open the door, Mia." Vince's voice was a growl laced with rage. "You can't run forever." Ethan's mind spun, searching for a way out. The apartment was a dead-end door, one window leading to a rickety fire escape. Vince wasn't alone. Ethan could hear other voices, low and threatening, probably his men from the warehouse. The flash drive, hidden at Hope's kitchen, was their only leverage, but it was miles away. Right now, survival was the only goal. Joe whispered, his voice steady despite the danger. "Fire escape. It's our best shot. I'll hold 'em off." "No," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We're not leaving you." Joe's eyes softened, but he shook his head. "You're a good kid, Ethan, but this ain't your fight. Get Mia out. Get that drive. End this." Mia's grip tightened on Ethan's arm. "Joe, no," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't lose you too." The door splintered, a fist breaking through the wood. Vince's scarred face appeared in the gap, his eyes wild. "Time's up," he roared, kicking the door harder. Ethan made a split-second decision. "Mia, the fire escape. Now." He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the window. Joe nodded, moving to the door, his knife ready. Ethan hated leaving him. But Joe was right, they had to get the drive, or Vince would never stop. Mia hesitated, tears in her eyes, but Ethan pushed her toward the window. "Go," he said, his voice urgent. "I'm right behind you." She climbed out, her movements quick but shaky, onto the rusted fire escape. Ethan followed, the metal groaning under their weight. Below, the alley was dark. A narrow strip of concrete between the laundromat and a pawn shop. Above, the morning sky was gray, promising more rain. Ethan glanced back as Joe braced himself against the door, which was nearly off its hinges. "Come on," Mia hissed, already halfway down the ladder. Ethan scrambled after her, his injuries screaming with every step. The door crashed open behind them, and Joe's shout was cut off by a thud. Ethan's stomach twisted, but he couldn't stop. He hit the ground beside Mia, grabbing her hand as they sprinted down the alley. Footsteps pounded above Vince's men, spotting them from the fire escape. A gunshot cracked, the bullet ricocheting off the pavement. Mia yelped, and Ethan pulled her behind a dumpster, his heart pounding. "Stay low," he whispered, peering out. Two men were climbing down the fire escape, guns in hand. Vince wasn't with them, but Ethan knew he wasn't far. "We can't outrun them," Mia said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We need a plan." Ethan's eyes scanned the alley. A delivery van was parked nearby, its back door slightly ajar. "There," he said, pointing. If we can get to that van, we might have a chance. Mia nodded, her jaw set. They waited until the men were halfway down the ladder, then bolted for the van. Ethan reached it first, yanking the door open. The van was empty, except for stacks of cardboard boxes. "Get in," he said, helping Mia climb inside. He followed, pulling the door shut just as the men hit the ground. They crouched in the dark, the boxes smelling of damp paper. Footsteps splashed outside, voices muttering. "Where'd they go?" One man growled. "Check the street," the other said. The footsteps faded, but Ethan knew they weren't safe yet. He turned to Mia, her face pale in the dim light filtering through a crack in the door. "We need to get to Hope's kitchen," he whispered. "The drive's our only way out." Mia nodded, but her eyes were haunted. "Ethan, if Vince gets that drive, it's not just about me. The data on it names, accounts, deals it, could hurt a lot of people. I kept it to protect myself, but maybe I should have destroyed it." Ethan touched her hand, his voice gentle. "You did what you thought was right. We'll fix this. Together." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the fear melted away. She leaned closer, her forehead touching his. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "You're wrong," Ethan said, his heart swelling. "You're everything." A loud bang on the van's door snapped them back to reality. "They're in here," a voice shouted. The door rattled, and Ethan's pulse spiked. He grabbed a box, ready to use it as a weapon, but Mia stopped him. "Wait," she said, her eyes darting to the driver's seat. "Can you hotwire a car?" Ethan blinked, surprised. No. Can you?" She managed a small smile. "I wasn't always a soup kitchen volunteer." She crawled to the front, pulling wires from under the dashboard. Ethan kept watch, his body tense as the door rattled again. A spark flashed, and the engine sputtered to life. Mia slid into the driver's seat, grinning despite the danger. "Get up here!" Ethan scrambled beside her as she slammed the van into gear. The back door flew open, revealing one of Vince's men, gun raised. Mia floored the gas, and the van lurched forward, boxes tumbling. The man fired, the bullet shattering the rear window. Ethan ducked, glass raining around them. Mia swerved onto the street, tires screeching. The city blurred past warehouses, docks, then the edge of downtown. Ethan glanced back, spotting a black car tailing them. "They're following," he said, his voice tight. "I see 'em," Mia said, her hand steady on the wheel. "Hold on." She took a sharp turn, weaving through traffic. Horns blared, but Mia didn't slow, her focus razor sharp. Ethan watched her, awe mixing with his fear. She was tough, resourceful, and even now, running for her life, she was beautiful. They reached Hope's kitchen in minutes, the van skidding to a stop in the alley behind it. The black car was still behind, but Mia didn't hesitate. "Come on," she said, jumping out. Ethan followed, his body protesting every step. The soup kitchen's back door was unlocked, and they slipped inside, the familiar smell of bread and spices a strange comfort. Mia ran to the back room, dropping to her knees by the sink. She pried up a loose floorboard, revealing a small metal box. Inside was a flash drive, black and unassuming, but heavy with secrets. "This is it," Mia said, her voice trembling. "Everything Vince wants." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. "We can't give it to him, but we can use it. Bargain maybe, or—" A crash interrupted him. The front door of Hope's kitchen splintered sick open, and Vince's voice boomed. "Mia, I know you're here." Ethan grabbed Mia's hand, pulling her toward the back door, but it was too late. Vince and two men stormed into the room, guns drawn. Vince's face was bloodied from the warehouse fight, his eyes burning with rage. "Give me the drive," he snarled, "or I'll kill you both." Mia clutched the drive, her knuckles white. Ethan stepped in front of her, his heart pounding. "You're not getting it," he said, his voice steady despite the guns. "Back off, Vince." Vince laughed, cold and cruel. "You're brave, rich boy, I'll give you that. But you're out of moves." Ethan's eyes flicked to the room, searching for anything a weapon, a distraction. Then he saw it. The old gas stove in the corner, its pilot light flickering. An idea formed, risky but possible. He caught Mia's eye, tilting his head slightly toward the stove. She frowned, then nodded, understanding. "Last chance," Vince said, raising his gun. "Now!" Ethan shouted. He dove for the stove, twisting the gas knob full blast. Mia threw the metal box at Vince's head, distracting him, then ran for the door. Ethan followed, the hiss of gas filling the room. Vince cursed, firing wildly, but the shots went wide. They burst into the alley, sprinting for the van. Behind them, Vince and his men gave chase, but Ethan had one last play. He grabbed a lighter from his pocket, a gift from Tommy, kept for sentiment, and flicked it on, tossing it back toward the open door. The gas caught with a whoosh, flames erupting in the doorway. Vince screamed, scrambling back as the fire spread. Ethan and Mia dove into the van, Mia flooring it again. The black car was gone, probably scared off by the explosion. Hope's kitchen was ablaze, the flames lighting up the morning sky. Ethan's heart sank. Joe, Sarah, the others who loved that place, but he pushed it down. They were alive. That was what mattered. Mia drove in silence, the flash drive in her pocket. Ethan watched her, his chest tight with love and fear. "What now?" he asked. She glanced at him, her eyes soft but resolute. "We end this. The drive goes to the feds. Anonymous. Vince loses his leverage, and maybe we get some peace." Ethan nodded, reaching for her hand. "Together?" She squeezed his hand, a small smile breaking through. "Together." They drove toward the city, the fire behind them, the future uncertain. Ethan didn't know what came next: jail, freedom, or more running. But with Mia beside him, he felt whole for the first time since Tommy died. In the last place he'd ever expected, he'd found love, and he'd fight to keep it. Weeks later, Ethan sat in a small cafe, the flash drive long gone, mailed to the FBI with no return address. Vince was in custody, his syndicate crumbling under federal raids. Hope's kitchen was gone, but Joe was safe, recovering in a hospital, and the volunteers were planning to rebuild. Mia sat across from Ethan, her bruises faded, her smile brighter than he'd ever seen. "You didn't have to stick around," she said, stirring her coffee. "You could have gone back to your penthouse, your fancy life." Ethan grinned, leaning forward. "And miss this? No way." She laughed, and it was the best sound he'd ever heard. They were still figuring things out: their past, his world, their future. But for now, they had this moment, and it was enough. In the last place he'd ever expected, Ethan Caldwell had found his heart, and he wasn't letting go.